It is time for us to grow the hell up. I don't want to find myself in the cycle of sentimentality and rage again. We often think some issues are complicated. This isn't. Either you're going to be a beacon of freedom or you're going to be a white republic. You can't be both.
Hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to In the Meanwhile. I'm Marcus Harrison Green.
And I'm Nora Kenworthy, and we, like you, have been emotionally ping-ponging through the end of the Supreme Court's docket this week.
Boy, have we. It's a week that included the Supreme Court throwing trans kids under the bus yet again,
Yeah.
letting Trump fire any independent regulator he wants on a whim,
Yes.
and somehow, in the same breath, striking down attempts to kill birthright citizenship. You know, it's been less a Supreme Court term and more like I don't know, a magic 8 ball that's 2/3 outlook not so good and 1/3 ask again later.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Honestly, the week felt less like SCOTUS handing down opinions and more like SCOTUS running a rigged carnival game. Uh,
Yeah.
like a ring toss that looks winnable from far away, and you dump 20 bucks into it over an hour and then walk away with a slightly deflated stuffed animal and a profound sense that the game was rigged before you even picked up a ring.
Yeah, Nora, that's a metaphor that is particularly apt for the decisions on campaign finance and Trump's authority over so-called independent agencies. The court was fine pushing presidential powers to unprecedented extremes, but stopped right before it would impact their own investment portfolios. Very
Mhm.
convenient. Very convenient.
Yeah, how nice for them. Not to mention the birthright citizenship ruling, which I guess at this point we should be relieved that the Supreme Court still knows how to read the basic text of the Constitution,
Yeah, to quote
but,
David
like,
Simon, yes.
maybe this shouldn't have been up for debate at all? Like, a simple check the text would have sufficed?
Yeah, but instead we get a nail biter of a split decision, 5-4, that caused enough national anxiety to deplete the national stockpiles of Xanax, and
Mhm.
it's a lot of anxiety, folks. Let me tell you, in America, it truly does feel like we are playing carnival games with our constitutional rights, Nora, and I see no end of it in sight, unfortunately.
Yes, yes.
That said, speaking of carnivals, Nora, should we discuss the actual, real life, embarrassing as hell carnival the administration threw for America's 250th?
Oh, please, let's. Y The plans seem to have gone from world-class expo and modern-day World's Fair hosted by the Smithsonian to a broken-down Ferris wheel, melted ice cream, an AI George Washington, and at least one state booth that proudly displayed the Confederate flag.
Yeah. Yeah. Nothing quite embodies celebrating 250 years of American greatness, and that is definitely quotes around that. Like a scaled model of Trump's vanity project du jour, his triumphal arch, which actually looks like an unconvincingly painted prop from the world's cheapest sitcom set. And there are a lot of cheap sitcom sets these days, folks. There's streaming wars going on. Anyway,
Yes. Meanwhile, a bunch of states didn't even bother sending a delegation. Shout out to Washington State, one of them. So their booths were literally just two chairs in front of a photo board. Guys, that's not a state pavilion. That's the waiting room at a regional DMV.
that is so the case. Not surprisingly, though, Noah, even Trump's most loyal supporters were not turning out for this underwhelming celebration. And those that did attend are complaining about the cost of the food, the cancellations due to weather, including, I guess, Vanilla Ice was supposed to perform and did not.
How disappointing
Gosh,
for
wow,
everyone.
that he's still alive is amazing. Anyway, and and then all of the broken entertainment. Well, I will say this, folks, at least it's distracting them from the neon green, toxic reflecting pool.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, Marcus, it's not entirely fair to say that there aren't people excited about this fair because there was one attraction that drew a lot of fans.
Do tell, Nora, do tell.
It was a lovely blonde dairy cow submitted to the livestock show by a group of students who named the cow Melania.
Huh.
And why did they do that? Because they thought the cow looked like her. And honestly, if you see pictures of this, there is a striking
Oh
resemblance.
my god. No, I'll just say this, I'm trying to I'm trying to be an imperfect male ally, so I will just say that that is rather insulting to cows everywhere, Nora.
Yeah, I agree with your point. For a dose of context, let's actually look at what really drew crowds this week.
Yes.
In places like Huntsville and Birmingham, Alabama, towns not exactly known as queer meccas, pride
Mm,
marches drew big crowds.
yeah.
In Athens, Georgia, thousands showed up to their pride parade, and when Nazis tried to disrupt it, attendees shut them down peacefully, firmly, with a whole lot of bravery.
In tiny Sumter County, Tennessee, when businesses declined to support their annual Pride event, a couple offered to host the Pride event on their farm instead, with almost no resources and having never hosted such an event before. But they did have a musician, and then his husband brought together like 25 vendors and more than 300 people to create a whole new Pride tradition.
So look, Trump just got out party planned by Morgan and his husband of, and this is the actual name of their farm, Fruity Farm in Tennessee. And I really do love to see it, Marcus. But in all seriousness, I think this is what America's 250th celebration should really look like. Communities coming together to support each other, to reckon with our past and to make something better together.
Yeah, instead, drum roll, please. The Atlantic is reporting that the administration is considering marking the holiday by issuing 250 pardons, Nora,
Mm.
essentially selling them off to the highest bidders, as if he didn't, do enough pardons of, quite frankly, people. And I say this as somebody who has sympathies towards abolitionists, but there was definitely some people who, let's just say, hadn't gone through peace and reconciliation
Yes.
with getting out of jail, who had, participated in the January 6th insurrection, and
Yeah, I
now
mean, he's
he
already pardoned all those guys, so, like, who does that actually leave, Marcus? Like, mafia bosses and
I
pedophiles?
well, there's as we know, there are quite a few of those going around, Nora. But anyway, moving on, moving on.
Yes. Well, this blatant abuse of power has a particular sting to it because at the same time, Trump's goons are chasing down ICE protesters across the country, intimidating them, charging them with ridiculous crimes, and in some cases, even securing convictions on completely trumped up charges.
Yeah, Nora. For example, this week, DHS goons tracked down Paige Lynn Gunlay 5 months after she posted a critique of ICE agents on social media after the murder of Renee Good in Minneapolis. They went to her apartment, called her cell phone, and eventually found her at the polling place where she was working.
So, just to be clear, they spent taxpayer money traveling all the way up to upstate New York to intimidate a social media influencer to take down a post in which she said, Jonathan Ross, the agent who shot and killed Renee Good, should be indicted. And guess
That is
what?
correct.
He has not been indicted.
No.
Instead, this is how ICE is spending its time. And bonus points, while they were busy intimidating Paige Lynn at her workplace, they also violated New York State election laws that bar ICE agents from entering polling places. Way to go, guys. Like, just
Well,
10 out of 10.
well, I guess if the president can, I guess if
He'll
the
pardon
president of the
them
United States,
too. Yeah.
yes, there you go. I just gotta say, Nora, we can't find Tupac and Biggie Smalls killers, but they're, sending these folks out for Paige Lynn. I mean, my
I
God,
know. I know.
the priorities of the government. Anyhow, sorry, trying to add some levity, folks, because this is just really a fucked up situation, and in which it also includes late last week in Texas, where a group of anti-ICE protesters were given sentences ranging from 30 to 50 years in jail for providing quote unquote material support to terrorists. In this case, the evidence for their quote unquote again material support included printing and distributing zines and having a book club. A book club. Like, no longer are they just banning books, but I guess they're they're trying to absolutely ban the people who,
Who read the
distribute the
books?
books.
Yeah.
Yes, who read and distribute. There's a we'll try to link to it in our show notes, but there's a great article in The Guardian, about this group, and
Mhm.
it is just gut-wrenching, absolutely
It is.
gut-wrenching.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, and these are very long prison sentences, and the only hope for these folks now is that essentially some better president will get elected, one with an actual spine and a willingness to defend our constitutional rights, and then pardon them. I mean, the First Amendment is truly and
Jesus. Yeah.
officially gone, evaporated, eviscerated.
Yes. All the other E's too, Nora.
Yeah.
All the other E's too. Oh my goodness. Um, which does return us to the theme of this week and this episode, because we are 250 years in, folks. What exactly are we actually celebrating here, though, as we are on the cusp of July 4th? Because if you look at our candle count, so to speak, this country should have some emotional maturity to show for it. But instead, we've got the equivalent of a 50-year-old who still lives in his mother's basement, refuses to get a real job, and spends all day raging at strangers online.
It is certainly feeling like a moral and spiritual failure to launch here in the United States. 250 trips around the sun, and we are still refighting the same argument about who counts as a full citizen that we were having in 1776, just now with a population that has largely forgotten how bad King George actually was.
And this is very familiar territory for our incredible guest today, Eddie Glaude Jr. Has a new book out, America, U.S.A. How Race Shadows the Nation's Anniversaries. And his entire argument is that this country doesn't have an ignorance problem so much as a storybook fantasy problem. We know the real history. We just keep choosing the version with the happily ever after ending, especially whenever there's a big round number anniversary that demands a parade instead of a reckoning.
And Claude's whole argument is that until America actually sits with this real history, especially Black America's history, instead of some whitewashed highlight reel, we're stuck. And not stuck like things are tough right now, stuck. Stuck like in a recurring nightmare, the same mistakes on a loop, generation after generation, this weird inherited double consciousness from which none of us can get free.
Professor Glaude is the James S. McDonald Distinguished University Professor in the Department of African American Studies at Princeton University. He is one of the nation's most prominent scholars, a public intellectual who examines the complex dynamics of the American experience. His writings take an exhaustive look at Black communities, the difficulties of race in the United States, and the challenges we face as a democracy. His books include the New York Times bestseller, Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and its urgent lessons for our own, and most recently, as we discussed, America, USA, How Race Shadows the Nation's Anniversaries. So let's get into it.
Well, Professor, thank you so much for joining us this week. It feels like such an impactful week for your work in particular. So we're really honored to have you chatting with us.
I'm honored. And what a way to, make our way to the 250th, right?
Yeah. Well, I want to begin with a somewhat obvious question, but I think it's one that I think sort of hangs over your entire book, but also hangs over this week in a really profound way. It's one post by Frederick Douglass. I'm going to paraphrase it for modern times, but what to the Black American is the 4th of July? And in this 4th of July, our country's semi quincentennial year, how does that question read to you now?
Well, I think it's important to answer it against the backdrop of what's happening in the country. There's an all-out assault on the Voting Rights Act. It's been gutted. You see congressional districts throughout the South being redrawn. There's also an assault on the Hart-Celler Immigration Act of 1965. Those two pillars that transformed the demography of the country and the center of power in the country. Um, so we're in this moment where there is the court and TPS, there's ICE and Delaney Hall, and the ugliness of what we see coming out of the mouths of people like Stephen Miller and Donald Trump. It's a dark time. And so I think the question is not just simply what to Black folk or Black people, it is what to us is the 4th of July. Who, and what are we celebrating this semi-quincentennial is the question I think we need to be grappling with at this moment. Yeah.
Hmm.
Right. Oh, well, Professor, you One of the ideas that has generated the most discussion is your opening declaration in the book that you do not love America. And in interviews that I've seen you in for this book, people often have contrasted that with James Baldwin when Baldwin argued that his criticism of America was in and of itself an expression of love. But I'll say in reading through your book, I found myself thinking less about James Baldwin and more about Randall Robinson.
Mm,
And, he wrote the book, Quitting America, where he
mm.
argued that as a black man, he ultimately had to leave the country just to preserve his sanity because of the relentless burden of navigating racism and misunderstanding and exclusion at all points in life. But what strikes me about your work is that it seems to occupy, at least my reading of it, is it seems to occupy a space between those two positions, right? You
Mm.
you sort of reject this outright language of love for country, but you also reject the impulse to walk away from this country. So how do you understand that tension, right? How do you reconcile not loving this country while remaining deeply committed to struggling over what it can become?
Well, thank you. That's really really insightful. Great question. One of the ways in which I do it is to resist the abstractions.
Mhm.
Love of country. Well, what does that shorthand entail?
Right.
What are we talking about when we say, "Do you love the flag?"
Mhm.
Right? What are we talking about when you say, "Do we love the country?" Right? And for me, I want to hold off in that first sentence. I'm doing two, at least three things, as I've said in previous interviews. Right? One is I'm announcing that I'm not engaged in the idolatry of the state. Right? So I'm not interested in loving abstractions. This is those of you who've read your Hannah Arendt. It's an echo of that position in so many ways, right? Although with a difference. So I reject idolatry of the state, and I'm also announcing as a Baldwin scholar that I begin in a different place than Jimmy, and it might have something to do with my own formation. This, which takes us to the third point, which is Mississippi. I wanted to kind of capture my interior experience, my formation, and that is a space of wound, right? And that's the story of my father moving us to the other side of town, and I'm playing with my new friend, and his father comes out and calls me the N word, and so part of what I'm puzzled by is the expectation that we should love the country, and I think the expectation that black people, qua black people, should love the country, right, stems from a refusal to acknowledge what has been done, what continues to be done, right? And by it's almost equivalent to saying that the slave enjoyed being enslaved, right? So you need the character of Uncle Tom, and you need the character of Aunt Jemima. These are figures that allay the conscience of those who know that something awry, something untoward, something evil has happened. You see, and so I wanted to begin in that space because that's the space that is, in so many ways, a consequence of the divided soul of the nation. And we can't get there if I don't tell the truth about how I feel, because I'm worried that I'm going to get um, uh, called unpatriotic or ungrateful or told to leave the country, which has happened.
I did just have a quick follow-up for you, Professor, and I know you said to call you Eddie, but my mother listens to this podcast, and she will she says if I do not give the proper respect and honorifics
I
to
get it. I
the
get it.
folks. So anyway, so I do wanna ask you though, so then what do you think of the Randall Robinsons of the world in the sense of do you sort of understand where they're
Mhm.
coming from? Some people call that cowardly for leaving and leaving people behind. What sort of is your stance on that?
No, I think part of what I try to do in the book is to acknowledge it, right? So there's this moment where uh, 71 black men are petitioning Congress, and they invoke Moses Gordon. But just down the street in the Southwark district of Philadelphia, you have men marching with cutlasses and pitchforks, invoking the Haitian Revolution. There is a tradition of black politics that doesn't begin with it doesn't begin with black folk as the quintessential patriots, right? That's the beginning. That's the story that we get in the 1619 project. We are the ultimate patriots. No, no, no. You have a part of our tradition, folk who say that we can't flourish here. And if you could track it from early days, Paul Cuffey to Martin Delaney, we could tell a story about folk who thought and who believed that we needed to leave in order to flourish. But um, I I believe with Lonnie Bunch that America is more than an idea; it's an argument, and I don't want to see the argument. My great grandmother's buried here. That my sound, the sound of my tongue, right, has been shaped here. And why would I cede possession of this place when it's my home? Not the abstraction, you see, not the abstraction, because when we usually, as I've said before, when I hear love of country and I hear people wrapping their politics in the flag, I hear a rebel yell. I don't hear what they think they're saying. Right? I hear something dangerous and ominous, right? Foreboding, actually.
Your book returns again and again to a critique of what you call storybook America.
Mm.
You even write about monuments to storybook democracy, which feels particularly compelling this week. um, can you unpack for our listeners a bit of what you mean by that, and how do you explain the way that Americans are so attached to mythology, often much more than we're actually attached to real history?
Right. Thank you, Nora. That's such a great question. I'm preparing myself for this great interview now. I hear it. Um, yeah. So I think it's really important. America's not unique in the way in which it traffics in myth and fantasy. Countries tell themselves a story about their beginnings, right? And so it's not that I'm trying to single the country out for. Um, that's what nation building entails, in part, at least. But I think the way in which the country imagines itself as a redeemer nation, as somehow, right, this sacred project sanctioned by God, right? John Winthrop describing the New World as a city on the hill, right? A covenant. We are the new Israelites. The way in which then that religious scaffolding uh, gives meaning to the revolution. We have our own kind of apostles. We have our own Judas, Benedict Arnold. We have our sacred documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, our sacred holidays, Memorial Day and July 4th and the like. Robert Bellah describes this as America's civil religion. And so there's this sense in which the sacred nature of the project demands a kind of embrace of innocence, an embrace of exceptionalism that blinds us to the evils that that make possible our world, to the choices that have left. I mean, how can William James, the American philosopher, says that we have to note the bitterness at the bottom of the cup, right? And so our story keeps the storybook version keeps us from looking at that ugliness because we're the Redeemer Nation. The subtitle of one of the books on the New York Times bestseller list is Revolution, the Birth of the Greatest Nation in the History of the World. Right? Walter Isaacson's book, the greatest sentence ever written. Right? I mean, these are, the courage of us will save us, Brett Baer's work and all. So you see the storybook version of the country, which secures our virtue in the founding, no matter what we've done. And so, to my mind, Nora and Marcus, that kind of approach imprisons us in adolescence. We can't grow up because we must always be innocent. And so history has to be ignored. History is a nightmare for the United States. So we have to escape it. Here I am, in a clumsy way trying to appropriate Joyce. But we have to escape it repeatedly. And we escape into myth. right? In some ways.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about that escape and denial, honestly, in the introduction when you talk about sort of this penchant for avoidance of self-awareness in this country, and it struck me particularly because so often, 2016 with the election of Trump the first time, and then after, through 2024, we talk so often about, this is not who we are. This is not who we are. There's some catastrophe that happens. The over in South Carolina, the 9 parishioners who were killed, right, by Dylan
Mhm.
Roof. This is not who we are, and yet why is it so hard for us to sort of accept that at least this is part of who we are? Perhaps this is not holistically who we are, but it's certainly part of who we are. Like, why is that so hard to accept and to grapple with and to deal with and to just look head on?
Yeah, yeah. I think that it challenges the fundamental, foundational myth of the nation. Right? What does it mean to confront the fact that America was a corporation before it was a country? Right? What would it mean to think about the country as a settler colonial reality? Right? To admit it, you don't have to. It can't be. It's irrevocable. It happened, but you have to admit it, right? What does it mean to talk? That moment when John Adams says, purportedly said to King George, "We will not be your Negroes." At the moment in which he's giving voice to an idea of freedom, is based on an intimate understanding of unfreedom. Right? How do we map? How do we parse? Right, the reality that at the Constitutional Convention, even given the Declaration of Independence, you see all of these compromises that were made. Erwin Cheminsky, the dean of the Berkeley Law School, wrote this wonderful book about how we are the inheritors of this Constitution that is just wrought with all of these contradictions because it was basically written in a slaveholding patriarchal society that is, and we're still trying to navigate its shortcomings in some ways. Well, we can't admit that if we continue to say that we're the greatest nation on earth in the history of the world. And so I think that's one thing. The second thing is this, and if we do admit it, we have to confront that past, and that confrontation with the past requires a level of maturity, um, um, that the nation just fails to exhibit repeatedly. So instead of confronting the past, we will just simply deny that it happened, or they just won't believe me, or believe you, or believe us. It couldn't possibly be true. You're just making it up, right? And so they retreat into their illusions and become monstrous.
I wanna dig deep a little bit on what that tells us about the moment that we're in right now.
Mhm.
Many of us are experiencing this in our own generations as a really kind of history breaking moment, right? History is not just feeling like it's repeating itself, but we're in a moment where history is being actively erased, not
Mhm.
just unacknowledged, but erased, such as through Trump's quote unquote restoring truth and sanity to American history executive
Right.
order. How do you place this current sort of epistemic assault within the broader arc of American history and sort of history making that you're covering in the book?
Yeah, it is. Faulkner immediately came to mind. The past is not past, right? Or the way Baldwin channels that Faulknerian insight in his essay The White Man's Guilt." Right, we carry that history in us, and I'm trying to echo it with the epigraph of the book from T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets, East Coker. "In my end is my beginning."
Yeah,
Right,
one of
so
my
these
favorite quotes.
these things are interconnected, right? So um, what I see in this moment is a kind of second lost cause, right? I said not too long ago that what Trumpism and those who are committed to it desire, they want to be white without judgment, and that requires, right, holding history at bay, the retreat into the storybook version, and that's not new, right? That's not new. I mean, that's part of the collapse or the murder of Reconstruction. We have redemption, we have the Mississippi Plan, Redemption, of course, is the violent overthrow of Reconstruction governments throughout the South. We have the violent assault on Black folk who dare to exercise the responsibilities of citizenship. So we see Colfax, Louisiana. We see what happened in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and Hamburg, South Carolina, later in Wilmington, North Carolina. Across the South, these political coups and the systematic disenfranchisement of Black folk, right? But then the lost cause comes along. Those two things aren't the same thing. As you said, the lost cause is epistemic violence. And this is not emanating from the South, it's coming from Columbia, the Dunning School, writing about Reconstruction. And King on the centennial of Du Bois's centennial birthday delivers a lecture. It was probably written by Vincent Harding, but he talks about the propaganda around Reconstruction, which deny Black folk the capacity to take up the responsibilities of citizenship, and how that becomes a justification for their disenfranchisement, their marginalization, and the like. We're in that moment in a very different way, but the redaction, the removal, the erasure, the disappearance, right, all aim to justify, right, the reassertion of the claim that this is a white republic and it must always be.
Right. Well, Professor, talking about that reassertion, I remember watching, I think it was MSNBC back then, but now MS Now, where you're a frequent contributor of. It was I want to say it was the day, either the night of the election in 2024 or the morning after, but you were one of the few people I thought who actually called this election for what it was. And
Mm.
I remember it's as somebody who has consumed a lot of your guest spots and speeches. I think that's the only time I've ever heard you cuss before. When you were saying that, I'm paraphrasing you here, but you're like, I just can't believe that this is actually about a price of bread. This is bullshit. And then you sort of caught
Mm.
yourself, but um, but you also write in the book that Trump's reelection at that time, with over 77 million votes, you saw this as a moral referendum. And you say it wasn't just politics, but it was a large portion of white America saying unabashedly, we are tired of even pretending to reckon with this.
Yeah.
So how do you not sort of retreat into resignation after reaching that conclusion? Like how do you continue? I don't even say hope, but how do you continue with activity? In terms of betterment.
Thank you for asking that question. It's hard.
Mm.
I keep saying over and over again in these interviews, and I want to linger here for a minute, maybe because you guys have me feeling so comfortable. I'm not okay. I don't think the country's okay. I think our politics bear the burden, the weight of unresolved grief, right? Of unattended trauma, given all of those empty chairs that are in around kitchen tables because of COVID and the like. You can't have 1 million plus people die and just move on. It just so there's that. So there's a kind of the shadow of melancholia because they've done this shit again. And this is not abstract because not only am I attending to the grief, I'm also thinking about I don't have to raise my son in this, but there's folk who have to raise kids in this. So just as when I was playing the Tonka truck and the man called me the N word, and then I had to go into my house and my parents had to get to work to keep me from believing what the world said about me. And that is hard labor. And they had to do that while trying to put food on the table and put clothes on my back. Here we are in the 250th year, and people have to do that shit again. And so how do I keep from succumbing to despair? Baldwin says, we have no time for my elegant despair. He called it elegant despair because whenever the fever dream spikes, or to use Gwendolyn Brooks's phrase, whenever we find ourselves in the whip of the whirlwind, our task is to get our babies to the other side. We have always dedicated ourselves in the midst of it all to ensuring that we get our babies to the other side. And so, what I wanted to do in this book was A, to write some solid ground underneath my feet, right? To get the rage through the pen to the page, and then perhaps mold it into something more useful, but also to speak back, to tell a story that we can inhabit, that all of us could inhabit, that can serve as a counter to this nonsense, you know? So, um, but I begin with what I think we all need to begin with is that that's an acknowledgement that we're not okay. And our politics are a reflection of that fact.
I so appreciate you just giving voice to that, actually. It's very moving, and I think, if I dare say it, this book is a beautiful work of elegant despair and also the solution to it, so I really appreciate you putting it into our hands. I guess I'm wondering, you know, I teach college students, you teach college students. We're watching a generation of people who were, especially young people who were in the streets in 2020, who really believed that something had shifted and have watched this incredibly rapid backtracking,
Mhm.
and are trying to absorb that lesson. And so I guess
Mhm.
I'm wondering, like, what are you saying to those young people who gave so much to that moment and now feel like they're just sitting in the wreckage of it?
Wow. Um, I'm not much. I'm just in the muck with them.
Yeah.
The last you know, in the last pages of the book, to just give you a sense, I've been teaching a Baldwin seminar on his nonfiction since Trump came on the scene. And so we start with Notes of a Native Son, and we end with the evidence of things not seen, and we read the fugitive essays in between, but we read all of the nonfiction. And this one student, she's amazing. She was a neuroscience major. I've told this story before. She was a neuroscience major from Texas, an African American woman. Every time she came into my office or my space, you know, she's just joyous. But Baldwin had her on the ropes. She came in crying one day. I don't know if I want a white boyfriend anymore. I mean, it was just the world was collapsing around her in so many ways. But she wrote her final paper um, on on Baldwin's idea of love. How does Baldwin's notion of love change, shifts, morphs um, over the course of his writing? Because he's witnessed all of these killings, these assassinations. His own tone shifts and changes. And she wrote this sentence in the paper, in her final paper. She says, "What remains is not hope, but something just as lasting: the insistence on truth, carried by love and lit by rage." So I'm not the one to tell them anything. She she told me, right, the task is to bear witness. She was telling me. So I think this generation, we might describe them as, Nora, as the catastrophic generation. They know everything is broken. Some are reaching for the old languages of authoritarianism, fascism, right? Um, they're reaching for security, stability. Others are reaching for languages that go well beyond the current status quo. And we're seeing this with regards to DSA and others, right? It's a rich moment in our current moment when you have crony capitalism being evidenced across the court, and these people in the Democratic Party are complaining about socialists being elected when all the evidence shows that this damn thing is broken, right? So I think our task, my task, is to listen, is to curate encounters that can bring forth this kind of insight, and then follow instructions.
Well, we seem to be fulfilling that task very well, Professor. I I do wanna stick in this place for just a moment, uh,
Sure.
because as you mentioned Baldwin and some of the other great writers of our past, whether it be Richard Wright or
Mm.
Zora Neale Hurston, um, yeah, there's this rich tradition of Black artists who metabolize American pain into something that becomes transcendent, whether it's the blues or jazz or prose. And so I want to ask you, do you, I, this isn't for you to bag on, Gen Z or Gen Alpha, but do you think that tradition of transformation is still available to us right now in this moment? Are we in a moment that's outpacing art's ability to hold on to it?
I don't know. The moment you're getting old when you turn when the Sirius radio is on music with your generation only. You're not listening to what's going,
Yes.
or it's just on the news. It's just on the news channel. You're not. So I can't say with any degree of confidence what's happening in the underground,
Mm,
what's happening in places and spaces that are not kind of circulating within this economy of consumption that people are actually, I suspect, um, art has this kind of time lag, but I suspect that something is bubbling. You can't have this kind of death. You can't have this kind of disruption without art doing something. Um, um, so I'm waiting, to be honest with you, to see. You think about the kind of art that came out of after the Spanish flu, quote unquote Spanish flu. You think of the art that came out of the collapse of Europe with World War II, World War I, and World War II. The innovations that are happening, whether it's in jazz or what's going on with deindustrialization and hip hop, and that soundtrack. So I can't wait to hear it. But what I do know is that we're in a moment of of the of economic penetration of the logics of neoliberalism that have penetrated kind of cultural life in ways that make this moment exceedingly dangerous, right? And that's not because I'm not bagging on. I'm just saying to produce cultural meaning in this moment is very different than in previous moments. Um, so I don't know what's going to happen, to be honest with you, but I do know in the book I wanted I wanted music. So I commissioned a piece composed by Joel Thompson, the award-winning classical composer, because I have this conceit that I'm in conversation with Du Bois. I'm gonna go back and forth with the seminal intellectual of Black letters, and so and if you hear it, my God, it's entitled "And Blue," and it's the thesis of the book, and it will blow you away in so many ways. Maybe I'm preempting a conversation, but yeah.
No, I was just about to bring it up because, I was so glad that I decided to listen to the audiobook version of this book because the music is throughout that, recording. I guess I just wanna invite you to describe that soundscape a bit more because the way that you describe it in the introduction to the book is so stunning. It's such a beautiful, tribute to the arc of ideas in the book, but also the incredible music that, Thompson has composed.
Yeah, so you get the epigraph to the text, as I said, is from East Coker. In my end is my beginning. And Tom Joel has this blues sonority, this chord that opens. He just plays it, and you have to sit with it. And it sounds as if it's the same chord at the end of the piece, but he's actually rewritten it. If you play it according to the musicians who've played it, he repositions the black keys. And so there's something different happening, even though it sounds to our ear as if it's the same. So he's doing something at the level of composition that as a non-musician, I needed explaining to me. So there's that. And then, you get this quoting of the American Songbook, that familiar storybook story, and then of course you hear this, you know what it means, this quote of a motherless child, and then the middle piece is this, the upper registers and lower registers of the piano just going at each other. And we've been playing it across the tour, and I've been breaking out in tears, breaking down in the middle part, because you get this cacophony, right? This this rage, this cycle of sentimentality and rage. And the only thing I could think about are all of the bodies. Just think about all the dead people. Between the collapse of Reconstruction and the turn of the 20th century, 53,000 Black people killed, right? I'm thinking about the 1920s, and the epidemic of lynching. Ida B. Wells, before the decade of the 20s emerged, it begins. She's writing the Red Record, giving us an account of this haunting American ritual. The Klan is reborn in 1915, and Tulsa's 1920. We could just go down the death and carnage. And then he has this piece at the end, which is just this hope, this echo of 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 the spirituals, and you can still hear America the Beautiful kind of wrapped in it, but it's in a blues kind of form. But then that hope is attenuated by the blues sonority at the end, right? Hope at the crossroads, as I describe it in the book. So it is the argument of America, USA in music. And the idea was to kind of create that conversation, to curate it so that folk can see, um, can see it on the page, can feel it in the sentences, can hear it, and hear it in the music, and feel it in the music as well.
Yeah, do you know if they'll be playing this at the 250th
Oh,
anniversary?
hell no.
So we're
I have
stuck
to,
with Vanilla
I have to
Ice, is
send,
what you're saying.
I'll have to send it to you guys so you can hear it, without
I
me.
I shared this with you before we actually started recording, but my father is a military veteran. I've recently went over to his house in this very progressive neighborhood of Seattle, and so there's his
Good.
neighbors have the Pan African flag, the trans flag, the Black American flag, the Juneteenth flag, and on this one house in this one corner of the neighborhood, there's this American flag that he has, and and I think I shared with you how like I started to be almost embarrassed to walk up the stairs, and everybody in the neighborhood can see me very very starkly walking into this house, and I started to think to myself, why is that? Why is it that just even the sight, right, of this flag is enough to sort of be triggering to trigger me in a way of saying like, am I anti all this open society
Mm.
that I believe in? And remember speaking to my dad, and he was like, Marcus, you know how many Black people then died for this flag, regardless of whether you believe in it or not. I will be damned if I we try to keep the show PG-13, so I ain't gonna say what he actually said, but he was like, I'll be damned if these such and such as are gonna take my claim away from that. And so I want to ask you, Professor, because I know that you're not one for the idolatry of these totems, these national totems, and so forth.
Mm.
That said, in your estimation, what is worth sort of claiming, reclaiming, and making sure isn't completely, I guess, adopted or taken over by
Mm.
another side who has a very narrow view of what this country should be.
Yeah, I think Secretary Bunch of the Smithsonian is right that America is more than an idea, it's an argument. There are those who believe that MAGA has co opted the symbols of patriotism to such a degree that if you find yourself celebrating those symbols, you are immediately read as MAGA. And we don't want to cede that. I get that. Um, I am. I don't want to collapse all Black people into my position. My dad risked his life in Vietnam, but he came back to Mississippi. He couldn't vote. He risked his life in Vietnam and he returned to Mississippi. His daughter was the first African American graduate of Moss Point High School as the valedictorian, and the school district refused to let her be the valedictorian by herself. They had to have a white valedictorian. Even though my dad risked his life in Vietnam. So people have different reactions to those moments of sacrifice. And we know that a lot of our folks go and join the armed services not out of patriotism, but because they want to pay the bills or escape, or to escape their homes, because it's the only one of the few avenues to escape, and perhaps build a cosmopolitan life. So I don't want to collapse the complexity of our community. And what I want us to do, though, is to understand these symbols for what they are. They should direct our attention close to the ground, not to some abstraction, but close to the ground. If you love the country, what does that mean? That's why I want to change from the preposition to the conjunction. I want to take out of and put and. Right? So what does that love look what does it look like on the ground in terms of policy, in terms of housing policy, in terms of healthcare, in terms of education, in terms of living wages? What does it mean to love we the people concretely? So, a lot of folk wrap themselves in the flag and are just simply cruel. They're monstrous, and they do it under the cover of patriotism. Well, I reject that, and so that's why I say at the end, I say this at the end of the introduction, not in the introduction and at the end of the book. I don't love America, but I love the people, and that includes all of us. That includes all of us.
Yeah. I mean, I kept thinking as I was reading the book about the set of decisions that Nelson Mandela made upon becoming president of South Africa at the end of apartheid. He, like you, recognized that holidays and days of remembrance and symbols of a national history can either bring us closer to some honest version of events or can profoundly whitewash it. And one of his first decisions was to change some of the nation's holidays to ensure that they represented a more full history. And I guess I'm wondering if I was gonna give you the power to institute a new holiday for the United States or a day of remembrance that returns us to some kind of more honest history,
Mm,
what would that day be and why?
I don't know. I have to think about that. We have two of them already, but they're trying to gut them.
It's
MLK Day and Juneteenth,
yeah.
right? Juneteenth stands, as I write in the book, it stands in a tradition of this alternative commemorative calendar around freedom.
Mhm.
So, Juneteenth is one. January 1st is the first one. January 1st, because it was the end of the transatlantic slave trade. August 1st, because it was the end of slavery in the West Indies. July 5th, which was so important because it was Abolition Day, abolition in New York. So we have this alternative commemorative calendar. King Day, uh, if it was celebrated rightly, could afford us something more than, a day of service, right? Sponsored by Coca-Cola. It could afford us an opportunity to really think about um, the need for second reconstruction, the fact that his death um, calls our attention to the darker angels of the country and the like. So, we have on the calendar already, uh, if we're honest with ourselves, moments of intense reflection, but instead they become, you know, celebrations of the character of the country or declarations that we're on the, more perfect union. I get in trouble, Marcus and Nora, because I'm very skeptical of more perfect union talk too. I take that stuff to it works like Catholic confession. Let me just go out and say it, and then tell me to say 10 Our Fathers, and I go out and sin again because we're always already on the road to more perfect union. Um, so I don't know if we need anything else. I just think we need to be more truthful with what we have.
Yeah. Well, and I think I've also heard you note the irony that we celebrate Juneteenth, which is essentially a holiday of freedom delayed, right? Rather than these holidays of freedom granted. Um,
Yeah, because we're a country of freedom snatchers and freedom seekers. And I use those phrases in the book because the book methodologically is in my head. First of all, I nerded out in the book, right? There are all of these eggs in the book, Easter eggs in the book, from the title. I'm engaged in conversation with John Dos Passos, and then of course there's Toni Morrison everywhere, Du Bois, T.S. Eliot, Melville. All of this stuff is all throughout the text. Um, but I think there's this sense that what is required of us in this moment is, in so many ways, um, a kind of choice that has to be made. And I'm trying to link it to what I'm trying to suggest as one of the nerdy moments in the text. But I just decided that I was being too nerdy, and I don't want to be too nerdy anymore. So I was like, we don't have much time, and I don't want to. I was going to go into
Well,
something else. So
well, we appreciate the nerdiness on this show. It was actually funny, Professor, when you and Nora talking about Juneteenth. I had the opportunity to go to the World Cup match here in Seattle when it was Australia versus the U.S. men's national team on Juneteenth, and so there's obviously a lot of Australians here, and they were struck up a conversation with one, and he was, so I was explaining to him what Juneteenth was, and he was like, 2 years delayed. I, as hardcore racist and colonizer as Australia is, like, you all really do it bigger and better here, even in your racism, right? And I was like, well, I, I can't dispute that, I suppose. But
absolutely.
that said, I do want to wrap up with this, which has been a tremendous conversation, and just thank you for the privilege of your time, Professor. I know you were very busy on this tour, but this will come out the day before America, celebrates its 250th, and I want to ask you. You actually brought up Nora started with Frederick Douglass's speech, and I believe you bring up in the book that Frederick Douglass actually almost didn't get the opportunity, right, to give that speech because you had various white people being like, there is no way that this black man can be can be up here uh, to talk. And so I want to
Mm.
ask you, the fact is that I doubt at tomorrow's ceremony, at the White House, that there will be, anyone who, quite frankly, shares any type of identity with the three people on this, speaking right now. But I do want to ask you, if you were, for whatever reason, if you were invited to get up there and to say anything you could, about the 250th anniversary, what would be and you had 1 minute to say it, what would be the truth you would share with the nation?
Oh my goodness, it is time for us to grow the hell up.
Mm,
At the end of the book, you remember I resist offering policy recommendations. I say I don't want to participate in the ritual of pretending as if we're trying to address the issue. I don't want to find myself in the cycle of sentimentality and rage again. And I said, we often think some issues are complicated. This isn't.
mm,
Either you're going to be a beacon of freedom or you're going to be a white republic. You can't be both.
yeah.
Period. You can't be both. We can debate what freedom means, what it entails, but you can't be both. So we have to make a choice. And in order to make a choice, we're going to have to grow up. We're going to have to stop being this adolescent nation that retreats into fantasy. What I try to do in the book is I try to channel not the July 5th, 1852 address.
Mm,
I try to channel the Douglass July 5th, 1875 address.
mm,
What does it mean for us to lose, to have gained our freedom through a falling out between white men? And now that they're reconciling, what
mm,
do we do with the apostles of forgetfulness? What do we do with a country that's destitute of political memory? And so I'm trying to pull Douglass forward because we are in the midst of the storm. And
yeah.
listening to my student, I'm going to bear witness in that little minute. But at the end of the day, the 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 clear message is an old country message. It's
Mm,
time for you to grow on up now. and take responsibility, right? And maybe that can open up the door for us to be otherwise. Because again, what is our task? All of us, we got to get our babies to the other side of this madness.
Yes. Yes, sir. Yes,
Yeah.
sir. Well, Professor, this was truly an honor to be here with you today and just a tremendous conversation. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank y'all. Y'all made me smile. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Nora, I have to say, like, maybe I say this every week, and maybe it's just because every single week it's just true. But that was a conversation that just felt so needed in the sense that
Yeah.
it was just so cathartic, and in some ways, I hate to say it, but I mean, in some ways, healing. Right?
Yeah.
At least for me, like
Yeah.
I will tell you, I've been feeling very mixed. Obviously about the anniversary that we're going to celebrate tomorrow. And I wasn't quite sure how to metabolize it. I had a lot of rage, a lot of despair, a lot of, and in some ways, just a lot of questions that are still lingering in me of like, do I even want to stay in this country? Right? Is this country worth fighting for? Is it worth continuing? And I'll say this. I'm not going to say that I will never have those questions again, probably in the very near future. But at least for today, they seem to be satiated.
Yeah. I so appreciate Professor Glaude also. I think he got really real with us about how,
Yes, yes,
I think at one point he said, "I'm not okay. We're not okay."
yeah,
And I think there's also a catharsis in being able to say that to each other and say it
yeah,
honestly and hear it and just, I don't know, collectively recognize that none of this is okay.
yeah. And I mean, and it just goes back to our show, Nora. Like when we first started, right? We were kind of came from a place of trying to, you know, uh, deal with despair, right? And at the same time, promising our listeners that we would always be real with them and genuine with them. And I think the fact is that, and Professor Glad has done so many interviews for this book.
Yeah.
We've listened to several in preparation even for this conversation. And I will say this, and I am promise you, I'm not just saying it because of, I'm biased and this is our show, but like I think this is the most vulnerable, to your point,
Agreed.
that I've heard him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was such an honor to sit there in conversation with him. So
Absolutely.
I had other joy for this week, but that was actually my joy, I think. I like,
Yeah.
holy cow. The man is also like a walking
I
encyclopedia of,
know,
like,
like, the
Black
he's
wisdom and writing, and it just, like, pours out of him, and yeah, that was incredible.
he's, like, sort of the textbook definition of, like, he, forgot more than I can,
Yeah,
remember or learn, like, or whatever the expression is. It's like, or "You forgot more than I know." It's like, yeah, no, that's, that's pretty accurate.
yeah, and I'm just, like, I have this long running list of people who are now gonna be, getting his book as a gift this year, so, huge props to him for such an incredible book.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, yeah, I mean, I was definitely joy to go around in terms of this conversation, but I would say like a small joy for me, and maybe it doesn't equate to 8 ounces, but at least it's two of them. Is the news that Warren Buffett is actually delaying his annual gift to the Gates Foundation. Um, you know, pending more of a review with Gates's relationship with
Yes.
convicted pedophile and sex pest Jeffrey Epstein. And this kind of goes back to our episode that we did with Tim Swab,
Mhm.
and he talks about, is going to hold these folks accountable. And I'll say, like, look, I want to be clear about this, right? You have one person from the power lead in Warren
Yeah.
Buffett, and then another in Bill Gates. That said, as somebody who, my former life working in the investment world, where everybody sort of worshipped at the altar of Warren Buffett,
Mhm.
you picked up on the fact that whatever he did, it was very intentional and deliberate,
Mhm.
right? And I mean, this is somebody who does have quote unquote FU money, right? I mean, I know he's
Yeah.
not the richest person in the world, but I don't know, $78 billion, it's still you can still
Yeah.
build a nice life for yourself, right? I would definitely want to try it, but no, but so I'll say this: for him to do this is obviously a sign that he doesn't necessarily even think that that there's nothing to see here,
Yep.
and that you know Gates, maybe should have some level of accountability. At least that's what it seems to be signifying to me. I think, hey, I mean, I wish there were more to it, and maybe there will be more in terms of like propping this man off of his pedestal
Yeah.
finally with Bill Gates. But that said, hey, I will take it, and if it
Yeah.
takes one billionaire disciplining the other, hey, I'll get the popcorn out. So
Yeah.
here we are.
Well,
Anyway,
and given the, like, fawning praise with which the original Giving Pledge
yes.
was met with in the press, I would like to see similar press attention, to this dissolution or temporary
Yeah,
pausing of that, alliance, because
yeah, and
it is a really big deal. It
it
matters,
is.
right?
If I can't get the honest reckoning, I'll take the mere morsels of accountability. The mere
Alright.
morsels. Anyhow, Nora. Anyhow, shall we go ahead and get out of here for the day?
Yeah, I think it's about time to head into our vacations for this loaded holiday.
Yes.
So, folks, if this week's celebrations have you wanting to renounce your citizenship and log off forever, we get that. But remember, here's my glimmer for the week. According to Greek mythology, Narcissus was brought down by his own reflection in a pool, a reflecting pool, if you will. I'm just saying.
No, Nora, are you sure it wasn't his own empty concert venue?
It wasn't, but that could still be a possibility. Anyways, we wanna extend a tremendous thank you to Professor Eddie Glaude Jr. for not
Yes.
just coming on the show, but reminding us of all the work we still need to do to make this country live up to its idea of itself. And honestly, we owe it to ourselves and to our country to dig in and get started on that work.
Yeah, indeed, we all do, Nora. Big thanks as well to our producer, Jessica Partnow, and to Aham Aluo for our music. They make even the hardest reckonings feel well composed.
And we need your support to continue doing what we do. Head to our website, inthemeanwhilepodcast.com, to donate or subscribe. It takes 2 minutes. It costs way less than a Ferris wheel ticket at a National Mall fair. And unlike the ride, it actually works every time. Plus, you get to keep your dignity intact.
Indeed, you do. You can find us on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Episodes also air on Wednesdays at 5 p.m. on KVRU.
New episodes drop every Friday. In the meantime, remember to point that firework away from your face, please. Give your dog some Xanax for us. And take a moment to reckon with America's real history, even as you help yourself to another hot dog.
That is right, folks. And because you listened to this episode, you can have your American flag cake and eat it too, just this once. Have a great holiday, and we'll see you in the meanwhile.